13 to 15 acting production group here in the Diva Division. Please welcome the Spirit of Life.
This is the sound of a train made up of cattle cars.
A train made up of cattle cars that are full of people.
A train made up of cattle cars that are full of people who are being taken to a concentration camp.
A train full of people who are being taken to be murdered.
Over hundreds of trains.
Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of trains filled with people who are being taken to be murdered.
They were shot to death.
They were strangled to death.
They were beaten to death.
They were gassed to death.
Then they were burned in ovens.
The Nazis called this the final solution.
The world called this the Holocaust.
We were driven from our homes, taken only what we could carry.
Friends and neighbors stood on the doorstep, watching as they led us away.
They looked at us like they had never seen us before in their lives.
Like we were animals.
They marched us through the town to the station, where we were loaded into cattle cars, 89 to a car.
For 5 days, we traveled with barely enough room to stand. There was no food and no water. Straw, piled in the corner, was our only bathroom. On the 5th night, the train slowed to a crawl, passing through open ground, brightly lit up by searchlights.
We were driven from the cars, falling to the ground below.
The capos were instantly upon us, beating us with whips and truncheons.
We screamed in panic.
We were driven like cattle onto the platform.
Driven by prisoners with whips and the SS with dogs.
2 columns, men to the right, women and children to the left.
Standing there, waiting for a pointed finger to decide our fate.
We could see the glare of the searchlights.
Huge chimneys rising up, belching smoke and fire into the night sky.
And the smell, unlike anything we had ever smelled before.
We knew where we were now. We knew we were in hell.
The smoke and the smell were from the crematoriums. The crematoriums where millions of people were burned.
Jews.
Homosexuals,
Clergymen,
anyone who opposed the Nazis.
Many Jews went straight from the trains to gas chambers.
Those not selected for immediate extermination went into the camps where they worked as slaves. Underfed and overworked, many of them died from starvation, disease, cold. Many more were killed.
Those are the tales of the Holocaust.
June 3rd, 1944, the platform in Auschwitz. With the point of his finger, Dr. Menwood separated me forever from my mother, my sister, and other members of my family. That night, my first night in Auschwitz, I asked the Stopova, "Wo bist du, mein Mutter?" Where is my mother? The healthy-looking Stopova pointed to the chimneys of the crematorium and said, "Dort ist ihr Mutter." There is your mother.
What is a family? In the midst of the horrors of the Holocaust, when entire families are being killed, when the point of a finger on a platform meant life for one member of the family and death for another, survival, especially for the young, often meant that a total stranger became one's family.
This is the story of a kiss. In the midst of all the horror that was all around me, I was lucky enough to receive 3 passports from a South American country. Unfortunately, my wife and our grandson had perished, along with my daughter and her husband. Terrible as this was, I knew I now had the means to save two other Jewish souls, a middle-aged woman and a young boy. A couple of days later, a father came with his son.
I am giving you my son. God should help you, so that you should be able to save my son.
And then he kissed this boy on his head.
From this moment on, this Jew standing in front of you is your father.
And then he turned and walked out the door. A few days later, when the boy and I were deported to Bergen-Belsen, a Gestapo agent checked our papers.
Tell me the truth. Who is this man?
From this moment on, this Jew standing in front of you is your father.
He is my father.
From that moment on, that boy was my son, and I his father. But as to that kiss, I cannot forget that kiss. It has followed me all the days of my life.
You all know the story of Anne Frank. Anne Frank died in a place called Bergen-Belsen from typhus. In the Hasidic tales of the Holocaust, there was another story of a girl who got typhus. A girl named Anna. Like Anne, she became sick.
All the other prisoners told her it was pointless to struggle against death, but Anna was determined to live. One night, I became delirious with fever. I knew that if I lay down, the end would come soon. So, I began to wander around the camp, stumbling over the dead and the dying. As I struggled, I noticed in the distance a hill, shrouded in a gray mist. Instantly, the hill became a symbol of life. I knew that if I reached that hill, I would survive. I began walking towards the hill. When I couldn't walk, I crawled until I reached it. And I heard myself calling for my father. Please, Papa, come and help me, for I cannot go on like this any longer. Suddenly, I felt a warm hand on top of my head. It was my father, blessing me like he used to, every Friday evening, on the beginning of the Sabbath.
Don't worry, my child. You will manage to survive for a few days, for liberation is very close.
It took a long time, but eventually Anna recovered from typhus and returned to Bergen-Belsen to look for her father.
Back at the camp, I learned the hill I had climbed was a mass grave. I had been crying on my father's grave.
If one thing is true of the Holocaust, it is the spirit of a people to live, to survive, to celebrate their faith in God no matter what horrors they had to endure.
The greatest miracle of all is that we, the survivors of the Holocaust, after all that we lived through and witnessed, still have faith and believe in the Almighty God. May his name be blessed. This, my friends, is the miracle of all miracles, the greatest miracle to have ever taken place.
The spirit of life unites us.
How different are we really? The spirit of life survives.
We all want to be free to live our lives.
The spirit of life unites us to get along in peace.
The spirit of life survives.
When Amos Lustig was asked if his experiences in the concentration camp didn't embitter him, he always answered, "When I was in Auschwitz, I learned about friendship. When I was cold, strangers would shield me with their bodies from the blowing winds, for they had nothing to offer but themselves."
The spirit of life survives.
President of Tax Number 234, titled The Spirit of Life. We will move on now with Act Number 234A.